Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. I really don't, and I complain about this every time. I look at a button at the bottom and a button at the top, and I don't know whether we're live or not. So I'm hoping we are live, and I hope if you're getting ready for Christmas, it's not too stressful for you out there, dear viewer, and things are going well in the shopping department. So first, welcome back then to Loretta. Loretta, you've been away in China and doing all those other good things. How was it, and how are you?
I am great. I actually came back from Florida today, but China's amazing. I think they're going to change the world, take over the world. Everything's good.
And what do you get to teach you aviation law in China? What's that got to do with you?
Actually, what I teach in China is labor law and collective bargaining.
Wow. Gosh.
Which is a very interesting subject to teach in China, but it was part of the curriculum that they picked. So that's what I teach.
Is that interesting because my bias would make me think that they don't consider labor law for one jot, or are they really interested in it?
Well, collective bargaining is not something that you typically think of in China. So, but I think that it's important for students that want to be part of the global economy to understand labor law and collective bargaining. And they're certainly interested in it. They just don't have the work background because children in China don't work the way they do in the US. So out of over 100 students that I've had, only one has ever had any work experience, even though they're college freshmen, college sophomores.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. So they're arriving in the world of work when they finish their university for the first time, you know, fresh-faced. Oh, look out. Talking about arriving fresh-faced but tardy, here comes Simpson now.
Oh,
Oh,
coming from the future.
it might very well be Christmas in New Zealand for all we know. It might be come and gone. Good day, Bruce. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Very good indeed. Well, we've inadvertently introduced you and trust you are well, and you said you are, so that's good. And who I haven't introduced is Rob Thompson. Rob's on the road. Good day to you, Rob. You're
how's everyone?
We're good, I think. So I think without further ado, I think we'll go. But what we can do to start with, and this isn't going to work very well for those of you that listen to this as a podcast, because this would be a visual thing. We could do an unboxing. Because when I got home today, a bit of a surprise. I hadn't told him it's arrived, but thanks, champ. Spitfire's arrived. I've got a Spitfire. All I've got to do is glue it together now. One of those fancy 3D printed jobs from 3D Lab Print, and it is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And I must admit, I've already started, but I'll better read the instructions. I just glued this together. I may have missed some important bits already, but I was sat here before we started, and I thought, oh, let's just see see how it fits together. And before you know it, I had the glue out and I'd started. So I'm looking forward to flying this. That'll be quite a bit of fun. And I've already got the autopilot ready for it. Going to have one of these mini APM 2.7s. That should, I hope. Yeah, there's plenty of room in there that should fit in there. So we'll make this one an autonomous Spitfire. Although I am sorely tempted, I must admit, just to have it as a slope soaring thing, because that's what I like the best. So anyway, that's enough some side nonsense. Sorry about that, viewers. Let's get into. We're hoping John Taylor was going to join us. John is staying in a cabin somewhere in the woods with a different laptop and a dodgy connection. So hopefully we'll come and join us. And I've asked Loretta back, not just because we want to hear about China, because it's always bad news really when we have the lawyers on. Oh, but actually I've jumped ahead. We'll come back to Loretta. That's the bad stuff. Let's go for the good stuff first. Bruce, you've had a win.
Yes, I have. After many years of challenging the local council to allow people to fly their drones in the parks, I have scored a victory. The council has said it is their intention to allow people to fly their drones in the parks as of this Christmas, which is great. I mean, it took a long time and a lot of battling, but finally got there, which is, it's interesting because I noticed there's some relaxing of rules elsewhere too. I noticed, was it Spain, they've relaxed the rules a little bit too. So I'm hoping we've reached the point of peak regulation, and now the regulators are looking and going, well, nothing's actually really happened. The sky hasn't fallen. The parks are not littered with 747s that have been knocked out of the air by drones. So maybe we have overreacted a little bit to the threat level. And with luck, we might see a little bit of relaxation, except in America, of course, where they're going to have to register again.
Yeah, but I see you're being subjected to a UTM now. You're having a UTM trial over there, and that even included parks.
Yeah, that's true. There's a UTM at the. I'm just ignoring it because I don't need permission to fly, as far as I'm concerned. That the air is a natural resource, and when you start taxing it, which is obviously what UTMs are a precursor to, then it was always a big joke. Oh, they'll be taxing the air we breathe. Well, hey, if UTMs come into play, that's very much what will happen, and it's a commercialization of that airspace for drone delivery and all sorts of other things. I don't want any part of it. I'll just carry on. I haven't hurt anybody. I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And in the comments, I see Greensight saying a sponsored hat and shirt. Yes, it's Bruce, sponsored by Father Christmas this week. That's fantastic. Amazing. Or is that your day job at this time of year, Bruce?
Well, actually, I'm dyslexic. I applied for the job as Satan, but something got stuffed up.
They sent you the wrong gear, so you had to wear that anyway. Very good. Now, Loretta, Bruce touched on it. Regular licensing, it's coming back. It's back in your neighborhood. What do we think about
Registration? Well, I mean, I was never in favor of hobbyists registering because it really didn't solve the two problems that the FAA claimed needed to be solved, which was the identification of drones and education. And as we know from the drone and helicopter accident, there wasn't very much education involved with that man who did register his drone. But contrary to what some people may believe, I think that Congress's re-imposition of the registration, even though it did it in an awkward way, I think that if it were challenged, I think it would be upheld. And I think that people who choose not to register do run a risk of the FAA deciding that it wants to go for criminal charges, which of course it would have to go through the U.S. attorney. But I think that the drone operator flying the P-4 that hit the helicopter could well be facing a lot more than potential civil fines if he had not registered. So, I think people will make up their own minds what they want to do, but I think that they do run a risk if they don't.
Have they not done it in a way this time that it's not so easy for people to kick up about it? And I think, John actually said to me that he thought that he said he had a couple of comments if it didn't happen. So I'll go through his comments. He said Congress certainly has the power to legislate. They could, for example, have added an exemption to 336A to allow for model aircraft registration. But they've done nothing more. It's done. However, what they've done is to overrule the court, restoring the regulation while making no changes to the statute. The court held that the regulation violated 336A, and that now somehow magically changed. So yeah, I get his point there. Is it impossible to overturn this? Is this a done deal now?
I personally believe that it is not vulnerable to challenge because I think that John brings out problems with what the Congress did, but I don't think that they write particularly good legislation generally. And if the courts were really picky about everything that they did, I don't think we would ever get any legislation that passes muster. So I think here the intent of Congress is pretty clear to restore the regulations. And I think one could read their language as really incorporating by reference the regulations into the later enacted statute. So under the normal way of reading legislation, a newer in time statute will override an earlier in time, right? So later in time will overrule. So I think here the intent of Congress was clear. So I think that even though they didn't do it perhaps the way they should have, I don't think that it's vulnerable to challenge. But, if somebody wants to challenge it and wins, that's great.
So the AMA are quite happy about this. You're very quiet on this subject, Bruce. What are your thoughts?
Well, the AMA already runs a registry of model flyers, so this seems to be inefficient on the part of government. You've got a group which are not recognised as not being the problem. That's the traditional entrenched model flying community. They've got a registration system through the AMA, which works just fine and dandy. So why are they going to double up? Why are they going to duplicate? Why are they going to waste taxpayers' money introducing a registry which effectively requires some people to register twice, once with the AMA and once with the federal government? Why can't they say, we've just discovered that Gary's model Spitfire isn't a drone, so we're not going to require those people to license with us or register with us. They can register with the body that already exists, the community-based organisation that already exists, to monitor and educate those people. It just strikes me that, again, it goes right back to this thing. Nobody's identified what a drone is. No one's taken 5 minutes out of their day to say, is a Boeing model aircraft with tiny batteries weighing 500 grams, is that really a drone? No, it's not. Is it really a threat? No, it's not. So, really, these guys, why are they getting paid? They're not doing their job properly.
Yeah, Mark Strong says those intent on causing a nuisance or damage still won't register. It just seems like a costly pen-pushing exercise, and I think I'm inclined to agree. So, Loretta, does this mean now that but because you're still at, well, actually, just as we were coming in on air, the findings of the remote identification arc are beginning to filter their way out. What I was going to say was, they still, if somebody's not registered and they find a drone that's hit a helicopter, for instance, maybe somewhere in New York, how on earth will they find them? But obviously, this little bit coincidental that the findings of the remote identification arcs come out, and everybody is going to have to transmit in some way or another their identity for law enforcement agents to get them, and I guess they'll soon see if they see something flying and they can't tie it to a name, then they can go and figure that person. Where I was to take a long time to get to was, will this action mean people are more likely to get prosecuted for just that very thing? It's hard to prove they were flying from video footage. It'll be easier to prove that they were flying in air. Or will it, I wonder? I'll hand the transmitter over. Loretta, will there be more prosecutions? I'm waffling.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there could be more state and local actions, but, in terms of federal prosecutions, usually they're going to follow a bad incident. That's why, for the most part, you're not seeing a lot of prosecutions. There's not that many people around to do the prosecuting. So will there be more with state and local government involved? Who knows? But there definitely will be when something bad happens, like crashing into an Army helicopter, which, by the way, I think really points out something that I think people who fly beyond visual line of sight without having approval are really, I think, selfish, because they have no idea what's around them. And you think you're flying over the water. Well, the helicopters are going to be low in New York over the water, and hopefully the Army people were protecting New York from terrorists during the UN General Assembly. So, some people are quick to fault the helicopter pilot, but I would like to believe that it might have been mission critical to be at a low altitude during the UN National Assembly. So, General Assembly. So I really think that people need to reconsider, how they use drones, and whether it's really appropriate for them to be flying beyond visual line of sight when they don't have cleared airspace. I mean, to me, it's really arrogant and selfish, but that's just me.
That's very cool. Yesterday I was having a chat with somebody and we were trying to distill down into one word what we'd like to happen next year in the drone model aircraft world, and we came up with the word consideration. We'd just like to see more consideration, because that will bring safety and that will bring the other stuff in. It will drop the arrogance thing, and I completely agree with you. Thanks for setting that up. We hadn't spoken about that before.
But isn't a consideration something that a lobbyist pays a politician?
Oh, damn you and your political mind. You and your council meetings. Too much training down at the local council for you.
I thought the word was selfie.
Selfie. Yeah, I know. Well, it was, but it rolls it back to that first thing. We laughed very much at that original license fee. They claimed very much that part of your $5 was training, and plainly that person that had licensed this thing that hit the helicopter had zero to little to none to no idea. I mean, I think it's kind of fair enough to know what it's not, almost fair enough to not know what a TFR is as a layman, but you should know that you can't fly beyond visual line of sight and little things like that. It did show it all up. What do you think they're going to do to Loretta?
I think they're going to go for a hefty civil penalty, because I think that's pretty much all they can do. He's not licensed, so they can't take away a license, but I suspect they're going to go for whatever they consider to be the maximum. I mean, it does show you the stupidity of speaking to investigators without counsel, because he basically admitted these pretty serious violations. So, I think that the FAA is probably going to go for the maximum amount they can.
And g'day, John. I hope you can hear us.
John.
Calling John.
Yes. Technical issues here.
Yeah, no worries at all. Well, welcome from a cabin in the woods. Obviously, the woods are not that far away. You can still get a cell phone signal there. So that's great. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Sure.
So we thought you weren't going to make it. So I chatted through a little bit of some of the things you said in there and that email to me. What are your maybe you unpack your gut reactions to the new registration proposition again.
Well, and I apologize if this is redundant of what's already been discussed. But certainly, Congress has the right to legislate to require registration. I don't see how anybody could argue that they don't have the power to do it, but I question whether the way they've done it, which was very careless, is really lawful. They could have, for example, put in a statute that said there's an exception to 336A that allows the FAA to regulate for registration. They didn't do that. Instead, what they did was to simply restore the regulation effective on the date of enactment of the bill. And in effect, what they're doing is overruling what the court said. They're not changing the underlying statute, which the court said was unlawful. They're just undoing that. And I don't know that Congress can legally do that. And it's also curious that they made it an effective date of the statute, because that means that everything that happened in between the court's decision and that date remains what it was. So the people who registered, the FAA doesn't see it this way, and they're going to be, I guess, the controlling force. But I don't know that those registrations are that they legally exist. But that's what they've done.
I suppose some people will be caught in a limbo. That some will have deregistered and now they'll have to re-register, or they won't know. They won't know the status of their paperwork. I suppose it's opened up a can of worms for the FAA in some regards. I've seen a lot of people directing flack at you, saying that this never would have happened again like this if you hadn't have fought your case. And you've been receiving heat for this.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if anything, people have been, what I've seen is people are commenting that my case didn't accomplish anything, and I don't know that I agree with that, but I don't know that things would be no different if I had not filed. I mean, the registration would still be, the registration regulation would have remained in place and people would have gone forward. And I don't know that the number of people who actually went through the deregistration process is incredibly minimal. When the FAA was very deceptive about the whole thing, they had everyone's email addresses. They could have emailed them after the court decision or after they decided what to do and said, you know, if you want to deregister, this is what you do. But they didn't want people to know about it, so they didn't tell anybody about it. And word is spread about it in our, you know, the people who are active hobbyists and interested in the legal issues, we know about it, but most people don't. So, and there's been some paperwork the FAA filed where they estimated the total number of people they thought would go through the process. And I don't recall exactly, but I think it was 2,500 people.
Wow. Wow. And do you see yourself stepping up to the plate again with this one, or is it one you can't win?
I don't know that it's one that I can, but I'm considering different options at this point. But it's not something I'm prepared to discuss yet, and not publicly.
Of course, I'm sorry for even asking now. As I thought, no, I shouldn't have asked that. Sorry, sorry.
It's certainly a harder battle. One of the things that inspired me to file the first suit was statute, and it couldn't be, as the court said, statutory interpretation doesn't get much simpler. I mean, the statute told the FAA you can't do this, and they did it. This challenge would be more nuanced. And there are also issues about, you know, what do you do about what the FAA, you know, they continued to keep people registered in that 6-month period unlawfully, and they created unlawful hurdles to get people to deregister. I mean, the registration regulation was vacated, so the registrations didn't exist. And then what the FAA, I believe, was required to do was to immediately destroy the registry. And they created this deregistration process where you had to certify that you always fly in conformity with 336. That was completely bogus. I mean, there was no basis for that legal requirement. And then they required that you give them your personal banking information so that they could wire transfer the money to you. And that obviously set off everybody's alarms. And there is a law that requires wire transfers in most situations, but if you're an individual, there's an exception. And if you're not expected to receive multiple transfers of funds and your bank doesn't provide you information about the basis of the transfer, et cetera, the situation most of us would have been in, then they're not required to do it by electronic transfer. So, in summary, the way they handled it was unlawful, and I'm not sure what's going to come of that either.
It's a brave new world we're moving into, is it? It's not a brave new world at all. It's full of skullduggery and shenanigans in the background, and I'm not entirely convinced of what the end game is, other than my conspiracy theory of pay to play arriving everywhere for all manner of things. The sudden monetization of the first 500 feet of airspace, I think it's rolling out before our eyes in stealthy ways. But that's my conspiracy theory. Bruce, would you like to throw some logs on the conspiracy fire?
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. They're doing it all in our own interests. There's no problems, Gary. I don't know what you're talking about.
Ah, yes, foolish me. Yes, it is for the greater good and the benefit of all, isn't it?
But it's interesting. It's interesting. We had that period of registration, and did the number of drone incidents drop during that period? I'd like to see the stats, the figures, the actual facts, because this is one thing that is seldom brought up, is the facts and the evidence. And this is how I managed to basically overwhelm our local council and get the rules changed here. I just kept throwing facts at them, throwing evidence at them, and asking them to challenge them with counterfacts, but they couldn't. And so eventually, even the slowest dim-wittedest of people will realise we've been misinformed. So it's a case, I think, where someone should be challenging the FAA and saying, what did registration actually do for drone safety? If it did nothing, then what's the justification?
Yeah.
Well, and a few months ago, after the court decision came down, I sent them a FOIA request and asked them for records of any enforcement actions that were commenced based on drones that were identified through registry. The answer that I got back was, yeah, we don't have any.
Yeah, and of course the big case that's happened was the manufacturer dobbed in the person that left a bit of his Phantom in a helicopter. So you know the I don't believe the registry helped in that case either, and he handed over the logs, which I think that also speaks to what Loretta was saying about not speaking to them without counsel. That was
one thing that perhaps Loretta or John can answer is, which is the higher power, the courts or the Congress, the Senate, whatever it is? Who actually trumps who? So the courts have ruled one way, and we've had this act of Congress which has supposedly changed things. So which is the higher power? Can the Congress just say, I'm sorry, courts, we're dismissing what you say and we're going to do what we want? Can you tell me?
Well, it's a three-way system, and we've got this separation of powers where you've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And there's a case going back to a couple of hundred years, Marbury versus Madison, where the Supreme Court said you get to decide what's legal and whether the other branches of government are following the constitutional authorities. So when the court says something is unlawful, I don't believe that Congress could just go back and say, yeah, we're reinstituting what you've declared unlawful. They can change the statute, they can legislate, but they can't reverse the court. Loretta may have a different view on that. I'm not sure.
Well, what I was saying is that I think that the court could interpret what Congress did as incorporating by reference the regulations into a later enacted statute, so that even though they used poor language, what they were in effect doing was rewriting the statute and not overruling the court decision. So I mean, that would be my interpretation, or what I think the courts would do with a challenge to the statute.
One of the problems with challenging it is on the first go-round, it was pretty intent what the will of Congress was to prohibit the FAA from regulating. And this time, if you look at it, you'd find the opposite result, that even if they did it crudely and even if they did it unlawfully, the Congress was trying to, obviously, to reinstate registration. So you're not going to get as much sympathy from the court. And they're probably going to try to, as Loretta was saying, to turn it around to support what Congress has done. Unless, I mean, but on the other hand, since they basically, Congress has thrown out what the court has done, you might get a court that is a little annoyed that Congress has usurped the judicial powers. So we'll see.
And of course, you know, put my tinfoil hat back on, there are several groups that have lobbied this Congress and have walked in and had chats with them about commercial opportunities coming up, and they very much have a mindset that would want this registration, and they would like to be part of the registration and unmanned traffic management system that comes out. So it is a commercial interest to a few groups, and I wonder if a few people are throwing the rest of us under the bus. But let me move away. Let me get off my conspiracy motorcycle and travel somewhere else now. Let's travel back to that Black Hawk for more reactions to that. We've had reactions of you know, what fines they'll face. We've spoken about flying BVLOS. What struck me is it's beyond the headline and beyond a small group of people, which would be us, that are really interested in it, it's made no effect at all. It's had no effect on the general public. You won't even notice it's happened. It wasn't the great big threat and problem, jets falling from the sky, that the press really wanted. So, any thought?
The media did dodge that one, didn't they? They kept it very quiet, which is what they've done. But while we're on the subject of the education thing, I'm making a video right now, which I hope will have an effect. Basically, I know a lot of people are going to be buying drones or getting drones as gifts this year. So I'm going to do a safety video, an educative video designed for the first-time drone owner. And I know that Loretta is quite right that these people act out of ignorance, and they really, the problem is that they represent everybody. When someone does something bad, everyone's tarred with the same brush. So that they're inconsiderate, but it's inconsiderate. They're inconsiderate out of ignorance rather than arrogance. So I want to educate them. I'd like to hear from the people that are here. What should I include in that video? What should be the key points? Obviously, don't fly beyond visual line of sight. Don't fly above 400 feet. But what are the other things that really would make a difference if someone's got their first drone and we were to tell them four things that they had to remember? What would they be?
Find a big fish.
Well, I really think that some of the effective videos when you're learning how to drive is like the outcome of hitting people with a drone, I mean, I don't think planes are going to fall out of the sky, but I think that you could definitely hurt someone. So I think the focus on the outcome of flying recklessly, as opposed to just what to do, maybe will have an impact on people.
That's interesting, because one of the things that I do is already when I'm educating people is I do that. And one of the outcomes that, if you explain it, is if you do this, you're probably going to lose your drone. And people go, ooh, I better not do that, because it directly affects them rather than just hitting someone in the head and causing them to bleed. If you can translate that back to it's going to be a personal loss for you, that has a lot of impact. So that's one thing I was going to focus on. But you're right. I'll just need Gary to come over so I can hit him in the head with a Phantom and just show how bad the injury can be.
Oh, thanks very much.
Let me give you guys a little insight from maybe the security side. So let's say we're down here at one of these football games, and we're supposed to be looking for bad guys, and there's couple drones coming at us. How are we supposed to say, well, this one's maybe got a bad payload, or that one doesn't have a bad payload? It'd be a lot easier to distinguish one of you hobbyists or droners out there if you were. That'd be on the radar, supposedly on a system that the government would have to say, hey, maybe we ought to not shoot that one down right now. I think that's kind of what they're looking for, and I believe the security agencies are pushing this, as well as law enforcement and the FBI, and so they kind of get what they want. They don't lobby on too many issues, and if they say they want it, it really trumps everything. All three of those that we mentioned, branches of the government, if a security agency suggests it, then it's extremely difficult for them to say no.
Yeah, I think you're right. I noticed that there's been some more restrictions placed on flying over government installations, critical infrastructure, just last week, I think it was, in the USA. So I think this is far more about control than safety. Because the other thing is, I've seen some of the stuff that's going to be coming out next year in the sub 250 gram class, and it's going to basically make registration irrelevant, because there are so many really cool products coming out sub 250 grams. I mean, we've seen the Spark, we've seen what's possible with a small lightweight quad, and now the stuff that really, from what I've seen, makes the Spark look pretty primitive, and it's under 250 grams. So what's going to happen there? Because they can't use the safety aspect to force control. So if someone flies a 250 gram or 249 gram drone, is that covered? I know it's excluded from registration and a lot of the other regulations, but is it excluded from the the airspace exclusion zones that they have set up when the president travels, things like that? Or are those things sort of just completely unregulated?
No, everything is covered by TFRs and the regulations. There's no weight. There's no minimum weight. There's a maximum weight right now, but of course, beyond that is covered by existing aviation regulations. Yeah, I mean, I think it's...
In effect, even little children's toys, the little tiny toys, are still regulated in the USA.
They are, although no one's prosecuting them.
Yeah, in theory, anything that's made by man that flies is an aircraft. Paper airplane's an aircraft. but the FAA doesn't enforce any of that, so you just kind of have to do it by rumor and by guess.
I thought it had to be able to sustain flight and be controlled in 3-axis from the ground to with no pilot on board in order to get the aircraft moniker. I didn't think a paper airplane and a football came into that category, but I do agree it is naught and up. And someone said it's illegal to fly whoop in the TFR, and yeah, it is. And I think that's everywhere, Bruce. I think even in New Zealand, or maybe it isn't in New Zealand. I don't know.
No, in New Zealand, we're regulated right down to tiny toys. There's no sort of, because a lot of countries have this 250-gram cutoff where it appears that a different set of rules apply, like in Canada, where you're not nearly so restricted if you've got a sub 250-gram machine. So is it that in America that sub 250 is simply the threshold for registration or registering? Is it?
Yes, but of course it's very confusing to people because nobody even knows that regulations exist. I think if you ask the average hobbyist or the average person buying a drone at Best Buy, they have no idea that there are regulations. Maybe they've heard you have to register, but nobody knows that there's regulations for how they can operate.
Is there no burden on the regulator to adequately promulgate these regulations? Do they not have a responsibility to do that under federal statute or something?
Well, no, I mean, you're basically required to, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So, you're supposed to know what regulations are out there. Quite honestly, somebody should be doing a better job notifying people. But on the one hand, they enacted these regulations, but I don't really think they intend to enforce them or have any interest in enforcing them until something happens, and you just never know whether what you do is going to precipitate that enforcement machine to come down on you. And that's one of the scary things of the situation as it is today. So they do nothing most of the time, but then because of maybe a fault of the drone and maybe not your fault, the drone goes and flies over a restricted area, then all of a sudden, you're the target and things that you were not aware of become regulatory violations.
Yeah, I hate regulations that are enforced, we might say on a whim, at convenience. If it's convenient to enforce that regulation, they will, because they're so open to abuse, aren't they?
Well, I think that they are open to abuse, and I think enforcement is open to abuse because sometimes, minor conduct or minor infractions can have major impacts, and you can have, very reckless conduct that has minor impacts. But generally, enforcement is taken when there's more severe impact. Not always, but just generally, regardless of the conduct that precipitated it.
Let me explain a couple of things about enforcement. In the old days for manned aviation, there's only so many airports out there. So you could expect that if you got in trouble, they would radio ahead and the FAA or the police would be waiting for you. Or you got a surprise visit. As they used to say, the clipboard crew will be there on Monday, and they come in and they got clipboards and they're writing everything down. And sometimes people go away in handcuffs, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they go away with a hefty fine and a lawsuit to ensue. Now, these droners, it's the same problem that we have in security with, in the military. In the old days, we could rule the skies by having satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, and aircraft patrols and equipment and radar and the whole 9 yards to be able to say, no one's here. We can say nothing's here. But if someone opens a backpack somewhere and pulls a drone out and launches into the sky, there's no way for us to source where this person's coming from. And in a split second, people need to know that. And so that's a real problem for most of the folks that's in security and air defense and people that are worried about, assets that are on the ground.
But is this really? Are you just politely telling us this is where all this is coming from?
I mean, I'm trying my best, but I think what needs to take place though is the FAA botched a couple of areas really badly, and they need to repair themselves and push forward in a more meaningful manner instead of just not executing on some of the things. And they've gotten together and had bad advice, I think. So moving forward, maybe they'll get better advice. And they totally botched the registration, in my opinion. It looks bad.
Well, the next one's going to be the remote identification art and whatever standard we get lumbered with there. And that'd be quite important because that standard, this is a $5 thing that's happening now with register. I don't know. Is it still going to be $5? Let's say it is. But whatever electronic standard they impose upon the aircraft, this might be $100 standard. It might be ADSB. It won't be ADSB. It can't be ADSB. Please don't let it be ADSB. That would be a $500 standard that we've all got to comply with. Do you think they're going to do any better with that, Rob?
I do think so. What I can tell you is it's not going to be ADSB. I don't think the FAA would be in parts with that. So let's say we did do a UTM and base it off of ADSB. That might be like a private network somewhere outside of heavily traveled airports and airspace for beginning testing until we can gather data. That's what I would push to everyone, is to be able to gather a lot of data to mitigate the risks and present that idea to the FAA and argue your case. Data goes a long way.
Yeah, well, it's something that we miss in this industry, isn't it? A lot. I'm busy sticking my fingers together here as I'm sticking this wing back together.
The ADSB won't work because it's honestly too much of overload to the system. The system wasn't designed for that many vehicles. They scaled the system in accordance with how many aircraft are produced every year and used models and things off of those figures, and it did never include drones. So from just a system legacy and computer server, it wouldn't work.
Yes, the sheer volume of receivers required for such fantastic low-level coverage that would be needed, because ADSB also assumes that generally people are going to be above 1,000, 1,500 feet. That makes life a lot easier when they're up that high.
Someone could make the case, though. Let's say that they wanted to set up medical deliveries in Alaska. They can make a case to fly with a manned aircraft a targeted route and stick to that route only, and then go out and hand install relay towers to relay your signal, and then go out and do testing on those towers and prove your case. It's not much risk in Alaska, and that's where people should be trying this stuff out, and then come back down to the continental U.S. with your data and present your case. And I think you could set up your own ADSB UTM, but I think it'll be separate or have some small facets of operation between actual NAS as a beginning step.
Well, that's sort of actually that leads me on a little bit nicely to you. You've been involved with a BVLOS permission, so maybe you can unpack that a little bit. And are you using ADSB with that?
No, but I see. They were Greensight Agronomics was granted their beyond visual line of sight, but there's also 28 common provisions in there that they must follow. I'm not going to get into those details, but in there's some stuff we're going to have to work on. And like I've told people for maybe 2 years now, this March coming up, it's going to be announcement of airworthiness. I've seen more documentation to support this, and so in the next months or something, there's going to be equipment requirements for.
You snuck that out. I know you've been telling people, I've been listening, and a few others, but not many people are listening and noticing that there's airworthy. You scooped our scoop. But yeah, airworthy requirements are coming, and that really is going to put the cat amongst the pigeons. Which standard is going to win the day over there?
Whoever has the most money. Because that's how it works in manned. And I've been part of that process. I worked for a large European aerospace company that put equipment inside of airliners and corporate aircraft, and I know how to certify equipment to put on board and use testing equipment as kind of a rollout for your first prototypes, and be able to get all that stuff certified. So it's a very complex process, and the people that win on those are the people that have the most money, because they can hire the best. And those are people that's already identified by the FAA as people that are experts in these areas.
And to a certain extent, it's the same groups that have been pushing for the UTM stuff and are talking nicely to the FAA Congress, I believe, also have a hand in these negotiations. What do you think the most obvious thing or issue is the first big issue is going to be for, say, an operator of a DJI equipment?
Mean time between failure for equipment. There'll be some concerns there. You're going to have to replace motors that haven't died on you yet, and it could be as low as 20 and 25 hours per motor. That's just a sampling. I don't know. There could be all kinds of things. It could be testing and more registration processes for certain equipment. If you want higher outputs, they're going to enforce a ham license for, if you want to run your own UTM of course, or beyond visual line of sight, you have to follow all the common provisions that they've put out, plus all the other regulatory bodies' rules. It's super complex stuff, and anything is, I guess, when you're pioneering. The FAA just wants to cover their tails, that they don't authorize anything that ends up turning bad, because they've had enough bad stuff happen.
And you reckon that's coming in March?
The announcement that, hey, this is a focal point for the next year. March seems to be the time when the FAA announces what they're going to do for the rest of the year.
Okay. And then will this airworthy requirement, do you think, have any trickle-down effects into the model aircraft world? Because instantly, you can look at the UK model for models. Large-scale model aircraft in the UK do actually have certificates of airworthiness. They're issued through the Large Model Association, but the big jobs are properly tested because they are big. They might be, I don't know, 10 meter wingspan, big model Spitfire rather than a little one, and they take the safety of those very seriously. So do you think this will have a trickle down into large scale modeling, for instance, in America, or will it be forgotten, or do we still have to define what a drone actually is?
I don't know if they'll ever define what a drone is, but I do think some of that will trickle down, and I hope so, because any standards that are in place worldwide should be at least examined, and their data collected to see what they have. I would think anything over 55 pounds are subject to different rules here in the U.S., and the real distinction here is that you're making money, and you're a commercial operator, so you need to adhere to a standard. I think that's where airworthiness should apply first, and I think the FAA would agree on that. So until we've already got standards adopted for mean time between failures on equipment, signal strength, and replacement of, I guess, of props and screws, then they're just taking guesses, and they want to just cover themselves so they don't get sued. At the end of the day, they don't want any more lawsuits.
Do they get many lawsuits from our lawyers? Did the FAA get themselves in bother?
Well,
I don't know what Taylor costs.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of lawsuits on failure to regulate. So the lawsuits come in when they regulate improperly.
But then not around airworthiness for aircraft or something. There's a better way of doing it, or they should have done it like that, or the FAA didn't enforce that very well for that. They don't get themselves embroiled in too much trouble on that side, do they?
No, there's pretty clear Supreme Court precedent for discretionary function and stuff like that. So no, you can't be sued basically as a government agency for exercising discretion in terms of what you regulate. I mean, there's some possibility that, if you enforce the law against one person and not another, and it's very similar circumstances, you might have a case, but it's pretty rare that you can make a case out like that.
Yeah. So what standards are we going to set then, Bruce? You're gonna write them? What are you going to put in your book?
No, I don't know. Standards are a difficult thing. They're a great way for people to make a lot of money. And really, that threshold of commercial operation is probably going to be there for a long time. I don't think we'll see recreational craft, other than like the large models, held to a standard. It's just impractical. Who's going to do the testing? Who's going to check them out? I mean, it's like, you know, it's dream world. And again, it falls back to, why are we even involving the hobby in something? These regulations, as they're brought out, and registration, that sort of stuff. Yes, for commercial operations, you can understand why that is. But for hobbyists, it's like crazy. And I think what will happen eventually, the regulators will realise that one of the big mistakes they've made is to include the hobby as part of, and treat them exactly the same as the commercial operator. It's silly. You're just making so much work for yourself. And as we all know, regulators don't like doing a lot of work.
Yeah, true enough. True enough. True enough. God, it's a grim old one, this, isn't it? It's a grim, and like, you know, but I am sticking my fingers together, making this sweet fun. So look, it's 10-2. Has anyone else got anything particularly jolly that they might have seen that we can go to this week? Any more for any more? What? Oh, what's this? I see. And did it work? And
yeah, it did. I'll be putting a video up later. I flew him around the park, Santa on a drone. I mean, you got to have it at this time of the year, don't you?
Yeah, I suppose so. And no doubt you're going to have some sort of clickbait thumbnail as well to get people in.
Well, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Wouldn't be beneath you. Now, I haven't seen anything too jolly this week that's come up. So, does anyone else have anything else before we poodle off? Going once. Going twice. All right, Bruce is looking round. He's got to have something there to review. I know nothing. All right. Well, with that, I'll say thanks very much. Thanks very much, John, for making a big effort to join us from within the cabin. Loretta, welcome back. Rob on the road, and Father Christmas there as well. Do watch his videos. They come up every week. Like, subscribe, do whatever else you need to do on the Tube of the U for this. Don't forget to join us again at 2100 hours. Next 2100 GMT next week, and we'll see how things have moved along. Thanks very much, everybody. And have a safe travel. If you're traveling for Christmas, wherever you are, just be safe. Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy holidays.
And yeah, indeed. Bye-bye. Bye.